it's Michael Watts here, and this is a video I've been looking forward to making for quite some time. I'm in South Africa with Matthew Rice and Matthias Roux of Casimi Guitars.
Hello.
Hello.
Well, if you've been watching my channel recently, you will have seen a few videos going up about the creation of a new instrument. I flew into Cape Town about 48 hours ago. We spent the first day just hanging out and enjoying each other's company and just catching up. I think that's a vital part of the process as well. I managed the sort of tantric levels of self-denial that Sting in the 1990s would have been proud of. I didn't even see the guitar until about 24 hours after I arrived in South Africa. Part of me didn't want the anticipation to end, I'll be quite honest. We came to the workshop, it was sitting in a cardboard box in the case, and I just ignored it, pretended it wasn't happening. However, yesterday, I finally broke. I said, okay, let's do this. And the initial notes, that first contact, well, we managed to capture it. Oh, yeah. So we met for the first time 10 years ago at the London Acoustic Guitar Show. You had come over from South Africa with a ticket and a couple of guitars, not much of a plan, which I wholeheartedly respect.
It was a harebrained scheme.
It was,
and
the very
it paid
best.
off. Yeah. We borrowed some money, bought a ticket, 3 guitars, a banner, and when we got to London we bought a piece of black velvet and got a table near the entrance of the London International Guitar Show, and we set up there. So one thing led to another.
I still remember that day very clearly. I'd arrived at the show, and a dear friend of mine, Mike Burke, Mike, if you're out there, hello, came running out of the exhibition centre, grabbed me by my lapels. He went, "Man, there's a guitar in there that's just blown my brains out. You have to play this. There's 2 mad South Africans looking for you." And, that piqued my curiosity. I was like, okay, let's do this. And I remember meeting you guys and seeing the guitars. I'd been aware of your work. I'd seen them online, and I thought that is very interesting from an aesthetic point of view. It's very bold, it's very different to what I'd seen before. And I was very much intrigued as to how the aesthetic would translate into a sound, if it would be as developed a voice as the design, as the line of the guitars. And I'm sure we've all experienced occasions where we've seen a guitar online, fallen in love with it, and then the reality has been a little different, and that can happen in every aspect of the guitar world, from vintage instruments, brand new guitars, and lithium-made guitars as well, and no exception. But I've always felt that when you see an aesthetic that is so detailed and considered, the chances are that the sonic personality that accompanies that instrument will match that. So when I first picked up that C2 in African Blackwood, I had much the same experience that Mike had prior to that. It was something that stayed with me. And as we discuss the creation of this instrument, you'll see how some of the initial thoughts, the seeds that were planted that day, became vital themes within this guitar itself. If you've been following my channel for any length of time, you'll know that I have a genuine affection for a slightly smaller body instrument. My signature model by Jason Costle, the MDW, is a sort of miniature modified dreadnought. But your C1 is kind of almost a small jumbo, in between a small jumbo and a double O kind of thing. In fact, the closest really is a classical guitar, right?
Yeah, in terms of the sort of footprint of the shape, it's obviously a lot deeper than a regular classical guitar. And I suppose the idea with this one also, Michael opted for a non-cutaway, which was really a first for us. Our guitars also being, joining the body at the 12th fret, which was kind of a fundamental ingredient to our recipe and to the sort of tone that we were searching for. All of them had this really deep sort of scooped cutaway.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've seen the video that I shot when I was last here about the evolution of the Casimi guitar design, the first guitar that you made together was actually your dream guitar, wasn't it, Matthew? It was something right. that you had come up with.
Exactly that. On the topic of the deep cutaway, that's something that I was very keen on exploring, was to get to a cutaway which was completely flush to the fretboard, which allowed you to have the bridge meeting the middle of the most active part of the soundboard, but then the cutaway gives you access to all the upper frets at the same time. So it was kind of an attempt to get all the best parts of both worlds together.
One of the things that I really appreciate is the fact that across the three of us, we've actually got similar taste in guitars. Your first design was for a 12 fret. Matthias, you love classical and flamenco instruments.
Correct.
And that sort of body shape.
The first guitar I ever built, in fact, was a traditional flamenco guitar with the wooden pegs and all, which was a bastard to tune. But I really, for me, that's kind of home. However, I kind of left that behind when we started building just steel string guitars, and there was this kind of new voice that was inspiring me that I actually started to find in the guitars that we were building. In many ways, it's kind of this guitar that we've created for Michael, with Michael, in many ways does bring me home, and I think it's the same for you, Michael.
Absolutely right. Yeah, I started on classical guitar when I was a kid, and certainly the non-cutaway 12 fret guitar recently has really appealed to me as an idea. One of my heroes growing up, Isaac Guillory, used to play a beautiful Martin D35S, so a 12 fret Martin dreadnought. And I remember him telling me, if you can't do it on 12 frets, then, what are you even doing?
Then go home.
Yeah, exactly.
Some men made out of muscle and blood, other men made out of skin and bone. Muscle and blood, skin and bone. The mind that's weak and a back that's strong, below 16 tons, and what do you get? Another day over and deeper in debt. Sing the kid, don't you call me now, 'cause I can't go. Sold to the company soul.
Yeah, little moments like that came back to me during the process during the initial discussions, because it's always kind of intoxicating when you start a dialogue like this, because you start with a blank canvas. It's very easy to experience option paralysis and to go, would this be cool? Would that be cool? What should we do here? What should we do there? And I think that is a genuinely vital part of the process. It's one that I think a lot of guitar owners sometimes struggle with, and I know that a lot of luthiers sometimes struggle with, because it is, in the early stages, a sort of a barrage of ideas, and you want to maintain the momentum, but you also need this focus, and that's something that you two in particular are very skilled at. When I talk to people about your work, I try and convey this idea of, it's almost a minimalist approach that you have here. You have, in comparison to some workshops, very little in the way of tools. You don't have a huge room full of wood. You've got a small, very carefully curated selection of the very best of both things, to materials and the tools that you use.
It's reminiscent to me of the sort of Japanese principle of just in time.
What's that?
So Japan is a small country, and they manufacture a large amount of things. But they don't have a huge amount of space to store a large amount of things. So they just have a very efficient process of delivery, manufacture, and shipping. And it's called the principle of just in time. Right. And it means that everything has to happen just in time. You have to focus on the job at hand and get it done as well as humanly possible in the shortest space of time. So there's a kind of a Zen ethic to that, which appeals to us.
So this is the first non-cutaway steel string design.
Correct.
For Casimi Guitars. If I remember rightly, you did it by taking a photograph of an original C1 and just flipping it over.
Yeah.
And it sort of, I felt it just worked.
Photoshop does amazing things.
It's more than that.
We were actually initially in two minds about it.
I was very skeptical.
Yeah.
It was too easy. It was like, well, I'll just flip it over and we'll think about that. And I showed it to you and you were like, yes! So we thought, we'll give him some time. Turned out it was a good idea.
Okay.
I'm convinced
really
now. I'm convinced. I think that's what's great about working with you as well is, this, we would never have done this if it wasn't for the fact that we'd worked with you on it. So this is this guitar is a collaborative effort between the three of us.
Absolutely.
Actually. Yeah.
I think also, what we got from you was a very clear intention of what you wanted. But at the same time, there was this implicit trust that you gave us because you knew our work.
Completely.
And you knew that the voice of a Casimi guitar inspired you, and so there was a strong element of trust, but also this very clear intention from you.
Absolutely right.
Which actually really makes the process. It makes the process really pretty cool for us.
It's also trust and experience. We've known each other for a decade. We're familiar with each other's work pretty intimately. You know my playing. I know what to expect out of a Casimi instrument in terms of the voice, in terms of the quality of the build, and also in terms of the fabulous design. So I didn't feel the need to stamp my identity over it. I've played this for about 20-25 minutes in total so far. I'm already hearing new textures within chords that I didn't hear before. I'm hearing the voice of the instrument kind of rising up to meet me. It's a very supportive guitar, which isn't something that I've necessarily experienced in African Blackwood or rosewood instruments. This is my first guitar with a vitreous set of wood for the back and sides, and Wenge inner sides as well. And sometimes I've found that a combination like that can be a sound that I'm really not looking for. It's a great sound, but it's not necessarily me. My guitars have been mahogany, they've been maple, but it's in the voice of a Casimi guitar and the way that you guys approach that I've found a love and a use for, a musical need for African Blackwood.
It was from very early on when we'd obviously seen a lot of Michael's playing online, the videos, the demos of guitars that he was playing. And we kind of really, we knew that this man can bring out the best sound of our guitars. He could really, he could pull it out of them. When the time came to discuss, what he wanted in the guitar that he was getting from us, it was quite a relief to actually hear that he was keen on the African Blackwood, because that was kind of something that was, it was kind of like our signature tone wood, and also being from Africa itself was kind of very close to our hearts, and we definitely consider it to be the sort of king of the rosewoods. So the idea with using that for the back and sides, we felt was going to work really well, and specifically also for a smaller bodied guitar. By omitting the cutaway and going substantially deeper than we would on our regular C1 model, the idea was to get as much internal air mass and volume as we have in our C2 body size. But yet you have a smaller soundboard driving a bigger air mass. And yeah, the idea was to really get maximum fullness and richness, power, clarity, and with kind of a very broad dynamic range, which we find already is inherent in Blackwood and the way we use it. And also the immediacy that you get from a smaller top driving that air mass.
Rather like packing an elephant into a suitcase.
So we also have our signature bevel edges on the, for the playing arm on the soundboard side, and then obviously the chest bevel, which works really well specifically on deeper guitars. The deeper the guitar, the more you have to contend with in terms of your arm going over the front, and then the kind of just the ergonomics of how this thing sits in your lap. And bevels, the bevel edges have basically become a standard feature on every Casimi guitar that we build. So we've managed to incorporate them in such a way that it doesn't inhibit the top, specifically on a smaller guitar where you've got to be more careful, because you can't tighten up that soundboard too much. It needs to be free to do its job. Just on the note of bevels, we are big believers in giving credit where credit is due. And this is in fact a Kevin Ryan inspired arm bevel. So with regards to the neck, which you'll see on this one, is also a first for us. It's actually, we've stained it black using a very special ink. Underneath the ink is our finest Honduran mahogany, which is our standard. And yeah, the carve is essentially the same as every other Casimi neck that we do, which will obviously change depending on the dimensions of the fretboard that works for a specific player. As with all our necks, this one is carved entirely by hand. We don't employ the use of any CNC machines or anything like that. And luckily, Michael, having played probably maybe 15 of our guitars before commissioning this one, he always really enjoyed our necks, so we didn't have to do anything too different, other than the redesigning of this heel, which needed to work with, obviously, without the cutaway.
But there's one more thing physically I want to ask you about, and that is the way that end bit is designed, because I don't know what it's called.
The end bit that we also know as the headstock.
Yes.
Although I'm now going to call it the end bit because that's much more poetic.
So this is our signature hollow headstock. In this case it's also inlaid, which is unusual. People sometimes ask us how strong this is, because obviously there's a great big piece missing in the middle. But suffice to say, there are carbon graphite reinforcing bars which go further than you might think. And on the back, there is a wrap of 3 veneers.
Which runs all the way to the first fret at the back of the neck.
Yeah.
There's also no great big truss rod cavity board.
Exactly.
Truss rod access, which we have through the sound hole.
Traditionally, the weakest part on a headstock is right here, just by the nut. And in our case, this is solid mahogany reinforced with carbon fiber, so it's probably the strongest part. So since we first tried a sound port on a Casimi guitar, we haven't actually made an instrument without one. It just works with our recipe. Obviously, we have built instruments without them, but since we tried the first sound port on, I think it was the second C2 that we'd ever made, I think Matthias was just bitten by a crazy bug of curiosity one day, and he took a drill and just drilled a hole in the side of the guitar.
It's a relatively easy retrofit on practically any guitar, actually.
Well, yes, it is, but it depends on the level of care.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of unintentional sound ports inflicted on instruments over the years, but to get it right is a different thing.
Yeah.
And that was already quite a scary instrument. It just had an incredibly powerful voice right off the bench. Neither of us, I think, could have really imagined it being much improved on that sonic level in any particular direction. And yet we found, once Matthias drilled that hole in the side, it had this really interesting effect. It just tidied up the basses and it tidied up the harmonics. And then it also had added advantages. You know, it's like having two speakers. You have a stereo effect. It's very subtle, but it's not only audible to the player, it's also audible to people standing around. So yeah, there's this kind of three-dimensional swirling quality that it sort of adds to our particular recipe.
I know that both of you are big fans of the ellipse as a shape, and the sound port is elliptical, as is the sound hole.
That's correct.
As is the actual active part of the soundboard.
Pretty much, there are ellipses all over this guitar, all over all our guitars. This is also an ellipse, and obviously this is an ellipse, two ellipses. There are ellipses in the bridge, and the bridge itself is built out of ellipses. It's all parabolas and hyperbolas and ellipses. This is a shape that I've just always found very compelling. It draws the eye, and it has acceleration and deceleration, and it has this kind of movement where a circle is perfect, but it's static. It sits for all eternity in this perfection. An ellipse never stops. It's just moving and going, and that's a principle in design that I find very compelling, and I've explored it for a very long time in all sorts of ways. So it was a natural thing to do for me to create the shape out of ellipses.
So this is the sort of thing that we're dealing with at this level. Nothing is left to chance. And I was very struck the first time that I saw one of your instruments. Everything flowed with intent in the lines, in the feel, and in the sound. And that made a massive impression on me.
That's really awesome to hear.
A bespoke instrument like this is a wonderful opportunity, should you wish, to explore certain themes in the aesthetics. And I've done a couple of videos about the themes that we explored with this instrument. You don't have to do this, but I find that it lends the whole process just a little bit more richness, a little bit more detail and vibrancy. It's something that I find really inspiring, especially when I'm playing the guitar afterwards. So there were two main themes in this instrument. The first is humanity together with nature, which, as I've said before, is kind of the fundamental principle of instrument making and music making in the first place. The second theme was one of healing, of repair. And I spent part of my youth in Japan. I absolutely love Japanese culture, art, and food, and so much about Japan. And I was particularly inspired by the idea of kintsugi, which is the art form of repairing ceramics with gold. Now, obviously, we're very sensitive about something that is part of a culture, and we didn't want to just randomly, haphazardly approach that. When I first talked to Matthew about exploring this idea, this aesthetic idea, you did some experiments with gold paste and African Blackwood.
You know, we were lucky enough to have some rather eccentric pieces of African Blackwood off-cut lying around the shop, and so I experimented with rubbing gold paste in there because it was, you know, a beautiful thing to kind of highlight the scars and natural pockets. One piece in particular had been half eaten by a woodworm and created very interesting patterns. But in the end, I actually opted to, after discussing also another aspect which was interesting to all of us, which is bronze as a material, we all decided it would be more interesting to explore the aesthetic of kintsugi as an inlay in bronze.
Exactly, so it's the aesthetic rather than the process.
Yes. And that's another added layer of meaning and symbolism, which you can perhaps speak about.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So in terms of bronze, this goes back to this idea of humanity and nature. Bronze was the first alloy. So it was the first metal that was essentially man-made in a mix. I also lived in Greece for 6 years, and obviously bronze is a major part of the Homeric myths, the Greek myths. It's a vital part of humanity's history, and I find that very inspiring. And I like having inspiring themes in the instruments that I play. This is something I've explored with Jason Costle in the past. It's something that I find really quite powerful. You don't have to do it, it's not obligatory to go quite so deep, but when you're collaborating on an instrument with people who get your intent and also value this level of expression, then it's a very very rewarding process. I hope you found it that way too.
Absolutely. I mean, we were discussing just now how Casimi is more than just Matthias and I. It's something more than just the two of us. It's this third thing that we create together. So we've stayed with the kintsugi theme on the back. It's also in hand-cut bronze. And to me, it's also a little bit reminiscent of a bolt of bronze lightning in an African thunderstorm. I like it. Which is why I talked you into it. So a lot of these ideas seem to create themselves, and they come to me if I'm able to be open enough to them. In this case, I had Michael's unfinished back up on a guitar stand on my bench. I looked at it and I saw a piece of bronze inlay there. I sketched it out with a pencil, and it was just right. So I took a piece of paper and did a kind of a brass rubbing, if you will, and that became the template for the inlay.
We think it's a really unique and special thing that that we're a two-man team and obviously also best friends for since we were much younger, and we really feel that creates an opportunity for kind of this third entity, which is not Matthew and it's not Matthias. It's over here between us, and I think that's where a lot of the magic happens.
I mean, neither of us could create these guitars by ourselves. I can't. You were saying the other day that's the wonderful thing, is we get to watch each other doing all the stuff that we couldn't bear to do. I can't remember exactly how you put it, but I'll look over and see Matthias doing some very intricate brace carving, and I'll just think to myself quietly, rather him than me. And I'll continue doing what I was doing, and he'd look over and see me sawing a tiny little fraction of a millimeter off a piece of bronze and think the same thing. Together we make a half-decent luthier.
Yeah, we always actually joke about that.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this detailed look at a process that I personally find incredibly inspiring. Thank you so much to Matthias and Matthew for the incredible amount of love, skill, and artistry that you've put into this guitar. This is the best it's ever going to look and the worst it's ever going to sound. It doesn't know it's a musical instrument, yet it's still very green. I'm looking forward to getting to know it over the next couple of days. I'll put some more hours of playing into it. It's already revealing a voice that I'm finding incredibly inspiring and musical. Thank you for joining us for this very special episode of Luthier Stories. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay tuned.
We know you will.